Relationships are quite a complex topic, and so I've written a number of books about them. But in this video, I wanted to just outline a couple of the stages of relationship evolution that I've gone through. Uh, in my kind of like 11, 12-year-old period, I had one of my first crushes, and I remember we were out on a picnic together with several families, including this girl I had a crush on. We'd sung Beatles songs together, and we might have even kissed, but we'd certainly held hands, and there was this definite feeling of new love. And then, while we were having this picnic out in nature, um, she went off and I went off, and I ended up stumbling across her going to the bathroom, which of course caught me by surprise and caught her by surprise. Now, her response to this was to scream at me. Um, and this just shattered any sense of like, I can't stop this from happening again. I feel shocked at being screamed at. I feel, um, you know, it's too much to be this close and then just have it all blow up over nothing. And so that was kind of the first thing. And so I withdrew, and she never followed up or repaired. She never apologized for screaming. She didn't say anything to say that she understood that, I wasn't a bad person or something. And what she'd screamed sounded like, I was this horrible person, and it just felt too much. So that was kind of the first awareness that in relationships, it's very easy to be blamed for something that you have no control over, and the volatility and fragility is intense. Next came the choice to avoid relationships, emphasized by the fact, and I had a couple of other experiences when a high school girl had a crush on me, then slapped me in the face, then, and then wanted to get back together. And it just seemed like I've got nothing to do with this. These people are just doing their own program, and it's hardly a relationship. I'm being, just yo-yoed around for someone else's agenda. But the avoid relationship pattern really sunk in when I watched the tragedy of my parents' divorce, because the obvious conclusion was that relationships were neutral, that they could be incredibly destructive and harmful, or they could be incredibly beneficial. But the other obvious thing was that neither my parents or I knew how to determine one from the other. So it's like rolling the die. Let's roll the dice and see if something really great or really horrible happens, or something really great that then flips into something really horrible with no training. So the second, from that came the conclusion to avoid relationships until such time as I had more skill and training. Now, the third strategy was that life skills were hard enough. Learning how to start a business, learning how to build a house, learning how to make money, learning how to help people. In my landscape construction company, there's so much to learn. Concrete work, planting work, irrigation work, lighting work, various electrical pools, pumps, driveways, septic system. There's just this endless field of stuff to study. And it seemed to me, one, that life skills were easier than relationship skills. And secondly, that you couldn't, there's this military term, don't conduct a war on two fronts simultaneously. You have to do one thing at a time if it's a major thing. And it's like, how can you focus on a romantic relationship if you don't have money for rent, if you don't have food? You can't. So there's this whole field, of romantic relationships, and then there's this whole field of money and life skills and stuff. And you can't honestly focus and put relationships first if you don't know where the rent check is coming from. So my choice was to put life skills first and put relationships on hold. Now, when I met, a woman at age 26, she was twice my age, I think 58 at the time. And that made sense because understanding that the reason to refrain from romantic relationships was that I didn't know what I was doing, and how some 16-year-old or 20-year-old from some other abused family, how are they going to know what they're doing? Someone should know what they're doing. So the choice was to date an older woman. My first partner had been lovers with 100 men, had married, was interested in personal growth with the Channel Lazarus, as I was at the time. And so, lots of growth, lots of experience. And then she had her life together. She had a construction company of her own, a maintenance company. And so that seemed to make sense. And in many ways, that was a good relationship. Now, it was also a long-distance relationship, and what I discovered was one of the highlights was quality conversation. And so here comes, again, a value judgment that says, in a great relationship, you have great conversation for hours and hours every single day. You have sex maybe 10 minutes a day, maybe an hour a day. So, but either way, you're conversing just about all the time. And you're having sex 1 to 20% of the time at most. If you're really, having 3-4 hours of sex every day, okay, a significant chunk of the time, but you're always spending more time in communication. And what I noticed was a long-distance relationship allowed for lots of integration of nuance. When you're together, living together, and a lot of things are happening and you're not talking a lot, there are a lot of things that are flowing and a lot of things that are blocking or not flowing, and they're not being integrated and understood by either person. When very little is happening together and you're talking a lot, you're understanding each other enormously. You're bringing a lot of consciousness into the dynamic so that the time that you do spend together has a lot of respect, a lot of honor. Now, when my first relationship came towards an ending, I was already experiencing the bullying dynamic in my partner. And I was aware that in an unstructured ending, she would bully me to doing things her way. That wouldn't be good for us or me. And so I created a conceptual structure for the ending and then asked her to agree to that structure so that we could end in a conscious, structured way that didn't allow either one to bully or manipulate, because the structure kind of contained us. And that began the process that I continue to this day of not getting into a relationship with a woman that I would not want to end a relationship with. Meaning, I want every one of my endings to be honorable and good endings for good reasons. If, death is a good reason to end a relationship, you died, okay, we end the relationship. You're not happy anymore and you're not willing and able to change that, within the framework of the relationship. Great reason to end. I'm not happy. The relationship isn't safe for one or other of us. I don't feel like I can be myself because I want to please you and you keep asking me to be different. Another great reason to end the relationship. I'd like to find someone who actually likes me as I am. Lots of good reasons to end the relationship. But I want to have a good conscious ending. And not everyone can end well. Some people have fits. Some people, cling regardless. They don't care that you're miserable because it's not a loving relationship. It's a desperate relationship. It's an addictive relationship. It's nothing to do with love. Like, I don't want to face my own feelings, so I want you there. The fact that you're not happy, the fact that I'm avoiding reality, doesn't mean as much as avoiding my addictive, my compulsion not to feel certain things. So the relationship is being used as a means not to grow rather than a tool for growth. And so plan on a great ending at the beginning. And don't get into relationships with people I'm not willing to have a good ending with. Now, the next step was to take workshops on love, intimacy, and sexuality. And in this dynamic, I learned about asking for what I wanted, boundaries, desires, permissions. I explored my sensuality. I discovered that I am bisensual. I enjoy spending time with men as well as with women. And I have mixed feelings about, talking about this because my relationship with the Human Awareness Institute was positive at this time in my life and was something that, led to selective benefits. But it was also a very traumatic time that contained elements of sexual abuse by some of the staff at the Human Awareness Institute, and so it's, I need to kind of share that whole picture rather than just one or the other. But, it was very refreshing to learn the techniques of appreciations, the ideas of treating oneself, as one would treat one's best friend. The art of structure was one of the things because the scripts that I watched them read from facilitated some extraordinary connection with average people. I'm an average person, you're an average person, but with an extraordinary script, you can create an extraordinary encounter. And so that was something that I learned at that time. And also moving more towards a focus on sexuality. Next, discovering by accident tantric or multidimensional sexuality. Literally, my body kind of opening up into all kinds of awarenesses, etc., that I'd never had before, except with a crystal. And then, feeling that, this just peak flow of love and, divinity and stuff, and, psychic awareness and past life awareness, it's like, and then why is that here and then not with this other person, and learning all about that was, another stage. And then also one of the most confusing things of all is, like some of you may have had this experience of, having a divine experience with a thief or with a drunk. And so you have this divine experience over here, and we like to compartmentalize and keep things simple. So if I've had the most amazing experience with you over here, then you must be a soulmate or meant to be, right? But then what do you do if, this divine experience over here and then this absolutely shitty and traumatic experience over here? I fall in love with you easily and you're a jerk and a thief. How do you piece those together? Because we like these little boxes that people are neat. But, that was one of the most eye-opening experiences for me, was discovering that the people that I had the most profound experiences with, in terms of these multidimensional experiences, that this did not necessarily mean that they had anything to do with what I thought of as spiritual or good or healthy or anything like that. As a more mundane example of this was I met a woman who helped me to laugh and feel joy 700% more than anyone else I had ever met in my entire life. So this explosion of laughter and joy. She also lied and was a chain smoker and avoided intimacy constantly. So what does that mean? Well, it means that if I want to laugh 7 times more than I would with any other person in my whole life, that I spend time with a chain smoker who's going to lie to me and is afraid of intimacy. And if I want intimacy and integrity, that I give up an extraordinary amount of laughter in order to spend time with someone who tells the truth and doesn't smoke, and they don't seem to come in the same person. And so, this was kind of frustrating because, part of my paradigm learning from the Human Awareness Institute was to focus on my 100%. And my 100% would have been someone who, enjoyed the laughter and didn't smoke and didn't lie and who loved intimacy. But that never came into being. And so my focus, thanks to my mother's physical beauty and my father's focus on sexuality, my focus was largely on the inner woman. And the essence of that was the communication protocol. So, continuing forward, mostly dating older women, almost never dating younger women, in this period of time. So one of my most significant girlfriends around that time was 50 when I was, 29, 30, and that felt wonderful. And part of that also was, and this, also clashed, because I was unable as a child to have a healthy emotional bond with either parent. There was this very big ache inside me, in the little boy in me, to actually be loved by a mother capable of loving and forming a secure emotional attachment. And older women had more of that inner maturity. And I was way more interested in that experience than in sexuality. But also, questioning the hostility of so many American women around not wanting to do that. Meaning even women that could be that very nurturing, mothering figure, as well as a friend, as well as a playmate, but that they disdained their own inner mother, and in doing so also disdained the need of the archetypal little boy that is so malnourished in our culture. But my focus was on the inside, and the woman who would feel the most and who would create safe space for me to feel the most was the woman that I most wanted to be sexual with. It didn't matter how old she was, didn't matter how her breast size, it didn't matter, things like that. And again, I also encountered the reverse chauvinism that if I'd been with some 18-year-old big-breasted blonde, I would be considered a normal guy. But because I was with, all types of body types, 10, 20, 30 years older than me, I was unusual because I was prioritizing the inner qualities in a woman over her body. Now, my experience of the positive potential in relationships led me to put relationships first. Meaning I value joy, I value health, I value pleasure, I value play, I value spiritual growth, I value self-awareness, and I value helping and making someone happy. Now, a relationship that is good allowed me to do all 7 of those simultaneously faster and more efficiently than not being in a relationship, which meant that a relationship was elevated to my highest priority, which then understanding that balance is the key to this equation, that if one person values the relationship more than the other, then the one is going to feel needy and the other is going to feel suffocated, and vice versa. But if both people value and prioritize the relationship the same, be that number 1, number 2, number 3, whatever, that it will feel very well met and healthy. And so this began a long search to find women who really and sincerely put relationships as their number 1 priority. Now, during this whole process, I noticed that women project an enormous amount of unconscious nonsense. And the way that I experienced this was, I knew, if I had abstained from sex until age 26 because I prioritized a healthy emotional relationship, it was absurd to suggest that I was more interested in sex than spirituality or health. But I was told that I was interested in sex by women all the time. I was told that I was just like other men and men were like this. And so I really understood that women were projecting onto other men, not just me, what they had experienced in the past, and that this was far more damaging than it was to actually see the individual human being that you were getting to know and get to know that human being and relate to them rather than your fears and projections. Now, one of the other kind of irritating surprises around the same time as I started increasing my sexuality is that women would have sex with me, and then either they would behave in a way that was completely different than what I expected and I would be hurt, or I would behave in a way that was different than what they had expected but hadn't told me that they'd expected and I hadn't agreed to or said anything, and that they would be hurt. And so I realized that unless you have a framework of agreement and container for a sexual relationship that is, discussed and agreed to before having sex, that this happens a lot of the time. And so this introduced what I would call a pre-sex conversation to delineate the contract of the relationship. You expect me to do this, and you expect me not to do this, and you expect us to be together for this amount of time, and it to be monogamous, and monogamous is this, and it's not this, and let's just spell all that out before you set me up to fail upon the delivery of a promise that you make on your behalf for me. Meaning you make the promise on my behalf, but you haven't even told me what I have supposedly promised in your own mind. And so that became an obvious point. So deeper pre-sex conversation. And this continuously developed, the life partnership questionnaire. What is our sexual container? What do past lovers say about me that they don't like that you may want to know in advance? What's your ideal relationship? All of this, which can take just 5 hours. You can learn more about someone in 5 concentrated and focused hours than you spend bumping into them for 5 years. And I've met many married couples, and this was a little bit of an eye-opener. I would meet couples, and I would ask both of them questions in each other's presence that I was curious about. And I was stunned at how many married couples were completely ignorant about one another. It never occurred to them to learn this. And they would say, "Oh, I didn't know that about you." And I'd feel like, why do I know more about your wife than you do after 10 years of marriage? This is a joke. And I realized it's the nature of our culture. We just avoid really meaningful topics systematically. And so you could know someone for 100 years and never have this come up. But it's an important variable. And so what I developed was a set of conversations where all of that information could take place in 5 to 10 hours. So that 5 to 10 hours later, you would know more about this person and they would know more about you in the areas that mattered for compatibility than the typical husband would and wife would know after 10 years. And then you would have sex if that conversation went well. Meaning if you keep talking and say, well, what I want in a lover is this, and the way I want to end a relationship is this, and what I want is this, and you see flow points, then you'd proceed to have a sexual relationship based on that intelligent, pattern of flow. But if every time you say, I can't stand a man who's controlling, well, I'm really controlling, and I don't want to have a conversation about this, well, I do. Well, then you just don't have a sexual relationship, because sex is an amplifier of whatever pattern is there. If a horrible pattern is semi-conscious but there, you don't want to amplify it. If a great pattern is there, then once you've established and cohesed in that great pattern, that's what you want to amplify. As part of that deepening process of respect and awareness, at one point I wrote a 300 or 400 page user's manual that talked about everything I would want to know about a partner. Meaning, if I wanted to know that about them, then I wrote it for them about me. And so this was a user's manual. As I began to run into barriers around finding women who wanted to put relationship first, meaning in the United States, my experience is that career and money comes first, that doing what they've always done before comes next, and then several other things, friends and stuff, and then the relationship, in the United States in a dating period gets 4 to 14 hours a week. Somewhere, and then, the other 100 hours or so are all spent doing these other things. It's just like, oh, that's so painful. To just prioritize it like 4th or 5th when I want to prioritize it number 1. So I went through a period of not dating women because I couldn't find women to put relationship first. Then I went through a period of open, honest polyamory, meaning I had 2 to 7 lovers at any given time, and that way I was spending as much time as I wanted with people and wasn't nagging them to come on, show up with some more time. And so that happened as well, which was very satisfying in the complexity and in teaching me how influenceable I was by another human being. In that period, I discovered, for example, that if someone loved my cooking, I became a great chef. And if someone had transcendent, sacred, spiritual sexuality with me, I became a transcendent shaman. And that if someone wanted to play tennis and have a normal-looking boyfriend, I did that. That I had all these different parts of my potential that I enjoyed. And I enjoyed developing with people who enjoyed those parts of me. In other words, if I was with someone who didn't like my cooking, I didn't cook that much. If I was with someone who loved my cooking, I not only cooked a lot, but I loved cooking. Because I like making people happy. And so that was a very interesting thing to understand how different I was with different people while always being me. I never lied. I was always intense. I never cheated on someone. I was always sensitive, but very different in the ways that I expressed that depending on the person I was with. Now, after I grew tired of polyamory, because I I leaned towards monogamy as a strong sense. Polyamory was just a coping mechanism to, American women who didn't prioritize relating as much as I did. Then I decided to travel the world because I got exhausted at the level of pursuing and rejection to find growth-oriented women who would put relationship first and build a life around that. So I decided to travel the world and see, on the basis that somewhere in the world there would be a culture that put relationship first. And sure enough, in various places in Europe and Asia, it was 3 to 20 times easier to have a quality time, put relationship first dynamic. But then there were other problems, often where there was the most quality time, there was the least amount of thinking. And so it's like, do I want to spend deep quality time, or do I want to have an intellectual relationship? And is that, is possible, etc. But search the world for a culture that wants what I want, so I don't have to fight for it. And so that was a series. And that actually came, after the online dynamic, where one of the things that was quite, striking was I had noticed a pattern that really worked for me and my lovers. It was a pattern of a very strong, long, and transparent first date in which we'd cover a substantial amount of the architecture of what we wanted in relationship, moving into a sexual experience and moving, into a conscious, committed relationship. Now, and then there were all kinds of people that were way out of that pattern, like, no, I would never have sex with someone for 3 months or whatever it is, all this kind of stuff. And so I don't like rejecting people or being rejected, and so I tried to put all that pattern into words, like I'll typically have sex on a first date, we'll talk about these things, it's, I never lie. I would spell exactly what these women loved in person out on a dating profile. And then the same women hated it in writing. They loved it in experience, they hated it in writing. So it's like the more honest and direct I'm being, the more I'm being rejected. And yet I'm setting you up to win. So this was irritating. And this just speaks to the split between, one of the things that became obvious to me is that the way something sounds and the way some people imagine it is very different than the way they actually experience doing it. And so in a very bizarre and irritating way, for people to have the best experience of something, you had to not tell them the plan, so to speak, which really irritated me because I like including and being included in all levels of relationship. And the transparency piece in relationship that has been always there as a really strong part came as both a desire to antidote the incredible invisibility and lack of emotional connection as a child with both parents, but also the real awareness from, again, those couples conversations and dialogues that many people were in relationship with their projections of the other person and were not actually in relationship with the other person. Meaning, if I don't ask you what your favorite color is, and I assume that your favorite color is blue, and I think I love you, what I'm loving is a series of projections, including that you love the color blue, that you like this, that you hate Margaret Thatcher, and I have all these projections that I've never actually taken the time to actually ask and learn. So I'm not actually in love with you. I'm in love with what I imagine you to be in the absence of real data. And that's not love. That's fantasy and infatuation with a projection. Now, it was very clear I didn't want this. And this happened a number of times, and I felt it was off. There would be women who I was meeting, and they'd say, Dane, I trust you completely. I trust everything about you. And I said, you've known me for 4 hours. What exactly are you trusting? And they say, oh, everything. And I'd say, okay, so let's play this out, So let's pretend that you've landed on a plane to see me. What does this trust look like? You trust that I'm going to be there at the airport waiting and going to pick you up? Yes, I trust that. Well, that's wrong. I hate hanging around in airports. I'd probably send you an Uber and wait for you in a relaxed way at home because I'd want to really greet you without the noise and stuff. I'd hate our first meeting to be all about, just being frazzled. I'd really want to be there when you arrived at my house. So that's what I would do because I value our first connection being really meaningful. And when I'm driving and stuff, it just feels like I'd rather delay the interaction and have, myself be present. So you trusted wrong. So what else do you think that I am that you're trusting completely? In other words, this is a complete setup. You know nothing about me and my values, but you're pretending that because you've decided to trust me that I will behave the way you want me to behave, and you haven't even told me what that is. So, this is not love. This is fantasy and punishment. I don't want to be a continual disappointment just because I'm not living up to your fantasy that you haven't even told me what it is. And then these women would be shocked. It's like it was a surprise that someone could be different than their projection. And I was like, why is that a shock? Has anyone ever lived up to your fantasy that you didn't bother telling them? I mean, well, then why aren't you still with them? It's like, well, this is a joke. So, so the transparency for me is a doorway towards love. If I tell you everything I'm thinking, everything I'm feeling, never lie to you, show myself as I am, and you love and are attracted to that, then that's real love. If I put on a performance, if I have a secret mistress and don't tell you, then you're not in love with me. You're in love with the fantasy that would never cheat on you. But that's a fantasy because I am actually cheating on you. So I don't want to be loved for a fantasy. It's so easy to get sex if you want a prostitute that it's like, you don't need to break someone's heart you can travel the world having sex if you want sex. But if you want to be loved, tell people the truth. Be who you are. If they can love that, then you are loved. If they can't stand that truth, then you are not loved by them. And I never understood the depressing shortcut of I want to be loved, so I'll pretend to be the person you are able to love, rather than here's who I am, and if you can't love that, then we're not in a relationship. We're certainly not a loving relationship. It may be in a punishing relationship or a nagging relationship. But this isn't love. You do not enjoy how I actually am, and it's my job to tell you that. Now, another kind of important thing along these lines is I felt much more relaxed as a sensitive, as an empath, when the other person was conscious of all of their feelings and they were out in the open. The only trouble is, at least 30% of women were not conscious of their feelings. So I'd end up picking their feelings up that they were suppressing. And then I'd be processing their feelings, and then it would look like they were mine. And this was very crazy making because all I had to do was leave the relationship and I didn't feel all those feelings. But around them, it kept coming up. If I was with this other person, didn't feel anything. This other person didn't feel. It's just, I'm feeling the feelings you won't admit to having because I'm an empath and you're determined to block those feelings. And so couples therapy is one of the things that I built into many of my relationship contracts. I'm willing to be in a relationship with you as long as we're actively budgeting time and money together for couples therapy. Not because there's something wrong or disastrous, but because I believe it will create more flow, more consciousness, and with that consciousness, more respect. Now, another very important distinction is money. I understand that money means so many different things to so many different people at so many different levels. You know, if you're rich, you're a jerk. If you're poor, you're a loser. Oh my goodness! Like, how do you deal with all this stuff? And my strategy, because most people will not articulate their true code around money, but it gets in the way because most of us have an unhealthy relationship with money where it means something it shouldn't mean. It means you're a good person or a successful person or a sexy person or not. It means you're a jerk or you're not. It means you're smart. Money doesn't mean you're smart. They're complete bozos who inherit billions of dollars, or someone who lucks out, or it means absolutely nothing in so many ways. And yet the meaning that is superimposed on money in the relationship affects the relationship often in damaging ways. And so my goal has been to have money neutral relationships. Relationships where we both contribute an equal amount of money to creating a level of relationship that comfortable budget will afford. So if you've got $300 a month that you can comfortably invest in relationship, I'll match it with $300, and we've now got a $600 relationship budget to go out to eat, to go out to movies, to take workshops, maybe save up for vacation, and that's all we need. So let's just keep it at that and have that be neutral so that whatever you've pretended that money means, it's not one or the other in relationship to each other. You know, if you think that poor people are bad, well, then we're equally poor because we're both spending the same amount of money. If you think that rich people are bad, well, we're equally rich. We're spending the same. So it's not creating an unhealthy vertical aspect of the relationship. And finally, my most important understanding is that relationships are way more complex than flying a 747. Because 747s have all the buttons and distinctions of a relationship, but 747s don't have PMS. They don't have feelings. They don't have past memories. They don't have cultural overlays. 747s don't argue with you. When you press the button, they don't say, oh, I'm tired, and just crash because they didn't want to let the flaps down. People do. You're coming in for a landing and you say, it's really important, we got to slow down. We're getting ready to our land, and they're like, oh, I'm too tired. And we talk about that next week and then crash. No, the relationship is coming to an end. You have to be on the ball right now. Slow it down so it doesn't hit with too much of a violent bang and ruin the plane. Pay attention. Don't be an idiot. Now, we are an emotionally and psychologically and relationally illiterate culture. We don't teach any of it in school. We go out of our way to avoid it. We role model it in the most absurd ways. So that's a very important awareness. Relationships are far more complex than flying a plane or driving a car, etc. But we operate our relationships with far less training and sophistication, creating far more violent endings, predictably and sadly. But the obvious remedy is to study and be aware of them more than average, not less. If you take 6 years to learn to fly a jet plane, well, study relationships for 10 years. But at the very least, pick people that want to grow and want conscious relationships. And then, in the most recent iteration of my marriage, I gave up on finding my 100%. I never did find, all these different traits in one person. And at the time that we met, I was going through trauma, and I was really upset at the way my trauma was being treated in the United States. It's like my culture was making my trauma worse when it would have been so easy to make it better. And I was pissed about this, and I was disgusted about this. And then I met my wife, who was in trauma. And I thought, I know exactly what people should be doing to me and are not doing. Which means I also know exactly what I should be doing for this woman that nobody's doing either. Let me be the kind of expression of what I so want from my culture, and let me give that to her. And I did. And I watched her blossom and develop. I watched her become, just bloom before my eyes. And it was so satisfying because I knew I would bloom that same way if someone held and honored and validated this same process in me. But I couldn't find someone to do that for me or with me. But I could find someone to do it for them. And I thought that's better than nothing. I am going to be and get the satisfaction of watching someone grow and blossom in the way that I've desperately wanted and have not received. And that theme has happened several times in my relationship patterns, and it's often brought surprising dividends. I remember one of my first relationships where I didn't feel sexually attracted to her. I didn't fall in love with her. I was surprised. I was expecting to. And I thought about just breaking it off. But I asked her what she wanted. And I gave it to her. And as I gave it to her, she opened up emotionally. A traumatic wave released. And suddenly I was in love with her and then deeply sexually attracted because I gave her what she needed to blossom. And once she blossomed, I was in love with who she really was. I wasn't feeling anything before because she wasn't real before. Because she was in defense before. Because she was in unresolved trauma before. Because no one was giving her the safety that she needed. So I gave her what she asked for out of no expectation of getting anything. And she blossomed into someone I could fall in love with. And so this was a similar type of dynamic. I wasn't at all expecting a romantic relationship with my wife. I just wanted to give someone what I so desperately wanted and was not receiving. And in doing so, saw this amazing woman emerge. And as that amazing woman emerged, blessed me with her amazing presence, until the point where I asked her if she wanted a romantic relationship, and she very much did, and the blossoming continued, etc., and emerged into a marriage. And so this has been my, an overview of some of the key stages in my growth around relationships to this point.